Infrastructure Committee to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Number 3, public comment. I had no one reach out to me for public comment, and there's no one in the audience. Anybody on WebEx?
Good morning, Chair Gibbs, Supervisor Hardinger here.
Good morning. All right, moving on to number 4, approval of the August 4th, 2022 Infrastructure Committee meeting minutes. There is one correction that Supervisor Robinson found on 7A for the GTA Transportation Aid presentation from Tim Ramberg. It states that he's the St. Croix County Highway Commissioner. He's the former, if that could be changed in the minutes. Former County Highway Commissioner. With that, is there any other corrections? Any discussion? Supervisor Robinson? Motion by Supervisor Robinson, second by Supervisor Dickinson. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to policy issue for discussion and possible action. Oops, ahead of myself. Number 5, A, review the draft changes. Oops, I'm on the wrong page here. Number 5, policy issue discussion and possible action. There is none. 6, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, or resolution. There's none. Moving on to 7, education presentation and committee discussion. 7A is Herpa Funds and GTA calculations from Commissioner Griesbach.
Unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot to report. I was at the Secretary's office. Unfortunately, I do not have a whole lot to report. I was at the Secretary's office a week ago Monday, talked to the Secretary. We also spoke to Merrill, who is the Local Roads Program and Finance Section Chief. Pretty much it was the executive committee for the Secretary of Transportation. And my question I presented to them was, if we use the ARPA funds, will that count as part of the calculation when I'm building my budget? It's revenue in and revenue out, so it actually does not help our GTA in the 6-year average. Again, we were going to use those ARPA funds for our match money, which is still a great deal. Given 20 cents, you get 80 cents back, 20 cents on the dollar. But as far as the, if we would use it in lieu of registration fee, we would basically be out that $3 million, $2.96 million in the rolling average for our 6-year average for the GTA. I asked that question. Everybody in the room all shook their heads. Yes, you are correct. That's in and out. I said, could I get that in an email? So after I presented to him in an email, I just got an email last night from Merrill that they're still waiting word back from OGC if, indeed that is right. They didn't want to commit to anything. I said I had a meeting this morning, and I got an email late last night that says, "Hi, Dan and Jim. We are working on a response, but I'm uncertain we may have it ready for Thursday. I'll check in the status on tomorrow morning," which is today. I have not received anything yet, but that was their first assumption that, again, that would not count in the building of the GTA because it's revenue in, revenue out, so it would be a wash. The other news I have to report on the ARPA funds is, we did submit a lot of projects into that. It boiled down to they got about $12 million to fund 36 projects that were submitted. They may be getting another $2 million in. So they're probably only going to fund probably 5 or 6 of those projects. So we had submitted for 3 projects for next year. Highly unlikely we'll get all 3. I still have high hopes that we're going to get one. Talking to a few people down there, that it may sound positive. We may get one of the ARPA projects, so one out of the 6 in the state would be great for us. So that is where those are. So, and then with the GTA calculations, we have that gap analysis done. Right now I'm building a budget that's going to be submitted actually probably this morning or this afternoon to finance. I did put in that $333,000 in our gap analysis into our general maintenance. So if you see that in there, that kind of came out of this committee. So I did put in that gap analysis to keep that PACER rating at a 7.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson?
Question for Administrator Leonard. I had a brief discussion with Andy Phillips at the opioid conference, and he was going to follow up with you and Kurt relative to the lost revenue component being of ARPA going in and whether that would count as a revenue. Has he reached out to you?
I have not received anything from Attorney Phillips as of yet.
But we're looking at it. I'm not sure that I 100% agree with Tim's interpretation, and because if it's lost revenue, it's money coming into the county, and we can potentially reallocate it. So I would hope that we would potentially push the envelope to make sure that if we put ARPA dollars in, it counts as a local contribution toward those efforts and helps our 6-year average. But we will need to go back and revisit our numbers and assumptions that we took to the county board with the $10 million of ARPA request in light of the fact that we're not going to be funded, because we need to stay on top of the earmarking and allocation of those funds. So by the end of 2024, we have to have them committed or we lose them.
Just to tag on to that, I did forget to mention that I should know by the end of September which projects. It's about the 2nd or 3rd week they'll let the projects awarded know.
Thank you. So as far as the lost revenue, are they going to make a decision before budget time, you think, or are we not going to know that?
According to Merrill, he was hoping to give me an answer yet today, so I'm hoping to hear something. I hope they hear back from OGC here within a day or two, so I would anticipate yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussions? Thanks for that update, and we'll be looking forward to how the ARPA funds are going to be used. Thank you. We're moving on to 7B, Large Assembly Ordinance, Jim Griesbach. But I know he's going to pass it off to Administrator Leonard. And the reason I had that put on there, I don't want this to turn into a 28th Avenue corridor deal where it's on the back burner for 20 years. I know it's only been like 2 or 3 years. But I just think for staff, so, the highway department, the parks, the sheriff's department, there's some type of guidelines as far as what are you responsible to offer, as far as if they have, a marathon that runs through parts of Marathon County and like I said, the roads. So I just think whether, it's now, I don't think it's in our jurisdiction right now, but it started out with infrastructure and public safety, and it never really moved forward over there. I don't know who wants to respond to it, but like I said, I just want to keep it on the radar.
Sure, I can, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Thank you, Administrator Leonard.
Thank you. So just I think, because we do have a number of new members, just to kind of ground everyone in what led to this discussion, as Board Vice Chair McEwen and Committee Chair McEwen referenced, the idea of a large assembly ordinance is something that was discussed at Public Safety and at this committee, based on the impact that those events have on county departments. That's really what started that discussion. So I think the marathon example is a good one. If the highway department is asked to set out barrels or provide some sort of traffic closures, or law enforcement is asked to provide enforcement resources or a squad car at a certain intersection, or if you simply have a large event at a county property or on a county roadway. That's what spurred these discussions. And there was a belief for a while that Marathon County did not have anything that actually governs that. And in fact, we do in ordinance. However, I will be very transparent with you. I'm not aware of any permit being issued under this ordinance for as long as I have been in administration, and I'm not sure anyone knew it existed until, quite honestly, I searched within our ordinances and found it. The large assembly ordinance is under Chapter 12, specifically 12.04, but I wanted to start with 12.01, talking about the licenses that are required for various activities, and you'll see assemblies under 12.01 subsection 2, and it essentially is broken down into, categorized by size of assembly and the cost of the respective permit. And then when you go to section 12.04, it provides some detail about the purpose of the permit and what the requirements are for said permits. And quite honestly, I think the ordinance makes logical sense when you look through it. It's requiring things such as a safety plan, emergency safety plans. You'll have a fencing plan, a water supply plan, restroom plans. And again, these are for large assemblies, and large assemblies are defined, as gatherings of 3,000 or more people for 8 or more hours. So the idea that you may need fencing, you may need restrooms, water, good things for these events to think about. Solid waste plans. If people are there for 8 hours, they generally generate garbage. You need to have all those things, parking. So the ordinance is in existence, but again, I'm not aware of it being utilized frequently. So we had the impetus to these discussions at the two committees, and then staff sat down based on the direction from the committees to try to understand what the operational impacts of these assemblies are on staff departments. We met with the city because there was a desire expressed by both public safety and this committee to have a consistent approach across Marathon County, so that, for example, you wouldn't have a nonprofit entity that was seeking to have a large event and required law enforcement safety services go to the sheriff's office and get one cost for that service, and then go to the Wausau Police Department, Everest Metro Police Department, Rothschild, and try to get a better deal or a different level of service. So that's how those discussions started. They started right before the pandemic, and the pandemic happened and they got put on the back burner. It is in my annual work plan update. I give a little bit of a history there. The conversations really, from my perspective, I think there certainly is a need. This is a perfect example of the real need within the county to do a comprehensive review of all of our ordinances. This ordinance specifically requires permits to be taken to a committee that no longer exists under Marathon County's Code of Ordinances. So a good example of a need to clean it up. One other thing that I did is I asked Corporation Counsel to conduct a little bit of a review on the ability of the county to regulate in this space, generally speaking, because it struck me when I read this ordinance that there wasn't a great deal of clarity with respect to the county role versus the role of a municipality, particularly an incorporated municipality, cities and villages. And our ordinances, as it is drafted, appears to provide, it doesn't make a distinction relative to events taking place within cities or villages and the county's ability to regulate. And there is a distinction, and Corporation Counsel wrote a memo about that. They also, there's a potential issue, and Corporation Counsel put it in a memo for me, about the timing provisions for some of the permit submissions, specifically insurance policy submissions and timing submissions for the permit generally. There was a court case Corporation Counsel found a court case challenging a very similar pattern ordinance from Sauk County, and it found that those issues existed and found the ordinance to be unconstitutional. So again, perfect example of an opportunity for us to revise the ordinance. My suggestion, because this is going to be an ordinance that is going to require significant input from policymakers, my sense is we may be served, Mr. Chair, if we have one supervisor from this committee that would be interested in working on this with staff, and find perhaps one other supervisor from public safety or another committee to really sit down and participate in the discussions as we move forward. Like I said, we certainly do need to clean up the ordinance, and we can do that in a way that's consistent with the city, but I think we'd be better served if there's a county board member or several county board members that would assist in that. But I'm happy to answer any questions about the ordinance itself as it exists today and kind of where we have been, but it hasn't been a priority. As I wrote in the work plan, it hasn't been a priority. Certainly now we're in the event season. So these departments are focused on doing their work and assisting in these events, so they don't have staff capacity to take on the redrafting of that ordinance.
Thank you, Administrator Leonard. Is there any thoughts from the committee? And like I said, and I think that's a great idea because initially, public safety, infrastructure, and I believe somebody from the parks were involved in it, but it was the entire committee. And I think, as Administrator Leonard brought up, maybe we could have one person from infrastructure, one from public safety, and somebody from parks. Sit down and with staff and try to draw up an updated policy on this and clean up this statute. So, Supervisor Robinson.
So what is the scope of that committee's work? As the issue that came here was the concern over the workload for, at the last minute, coming to the highway department, put all the barriers and the cones out there, and the sheriff's department to provide staffing at key intersections. Are we looking at the assembly, or are we looking at the county's role in events? Because that's a much different scope. Is it when they're seeking our resources? Are we concerned about the event from a safety and liability perspective, or are we concerned about it from a manpower perspective? Because that will drive different discussions.
I'll give you my 2 cents as to what was driving staff. I would say it was primarily the former, but certainly the latter came into, I think it's on. The latter came into play as well. The guiding principle we took from the county staff took from public safety and infrastructure was, if staff resources are being requested, we are going to capture our true cost in delivering those services. I will say in our discussion with representatives from the city, that level of direction and clarity was not provided by the Wausau City Council. My understanding is that staff from the city of Wausau, departments from the city of Wausau, subsidize far more frequently these nonprofit events. There are staff from the Department of Public Works, the police department, that will go to these large events, even if you're talking about the 400 block. City staff do a lot that, as I understand it, and I certainly could be mistaken here, but as I understand it, they do not always recover, or are not driven to recover their true cost. The direction we got from the Public Safety Committee and Infrastructure back at the end of 2019 was, we should really be looking at a policy that recovers our true cost. And I don't know, Jim, do you want to provide any input on whether or not you've been requested, you've had similar requests as you were getting in in 2019?
Yeah, we've been getting more and more requests for like lane closures, the Iron Bull folks, for example. That's kind of what brought it to light. They want to close down Highway N and R They wanted crossing people for the marathon to get down to KK. COVID ended up stopping the whole marathon, but we know it's going to come back at some point. So, yeah, it's do we recover the costs? And the other part, the other problem we have issue is the manpower. In the middle of summer, our crews are working 5 days a week. Sometimes, during the week they're working 12-hour days, and to try to find a bunch of people that want to come in on Saturday, it gets challenging at some points. But, tagging on what Lance has talked about with the city, I know that was one issue that they have, especially with the parks being a joint group there between city and county. How do they do that when they want to use Marathon Parks for a city? And so there's a lot of crossover that have some issues in trying to figure out what direction to go there.
Thank you. Supervisor Dickinson?
So excuse me. One question then, because I don't know how these things generally work. So Edgar, they want to do their steam show. They're going to Edgar, and they're coordinating and they're permitting, et cetera, and then they come to the county and say, can you assist in some way? Or the Expo Center, which used to have concerts, or the Taste and Glow. I'm just trying to figure out what is that general process. It seems there's some confusion, but.
Do you want to go first, Jim?
Yeah, I can start with that one at least. And it's all over the board. That that's the issue we have. We have nothing in writing. So I'll use the steam show for example. The steam show folks came to me with, they had actually went to Deputy Sheriff Billup first and Ted Kinnick and kind of worked out things, and then they came to me about signage. We didn't have anything available, so we just told them to go off and get Rent-A-Flesh. They asked me about permits. We actually have no permit on hand for putting up signage on our county road. So they're kind of all over the board at this point. Again, we have the marathons. They'll deal directly with me. So at this point, we see a variety of how they're approaching us. If they're going through Sheriff's Department first and then being directed to us, or they're going to Parks and then being directed to us. I know when we first started that conversation and before I got dropped, we were going to say everything needs to go through Parks Department first because they have tie with the city and the county that they would be the point of contact. So that's where we had kind of left it off back in 19.
And just to build on that, that's a great example because Edgar would be in charge of permitting. We would not. I mean, they have the authority statutorily to regulate permits within their boundaries. The county, even if they don't have a regulation, based on the memo from Corporation Counsel, if Edgar didn't have a regulation about large events and the steam show, I don't know what their average attendance is, but it's not small. So if they did meet the threshold for our permit, that wouldn't matter. They wouldn't need to seek a permit from us because they are within a incorporated municipal boundary. They still might, however, as Jim referenced, reach out to us and say, hey, we really like law enforcement assistance. Can you send a couple deputies out? Or Jim, can you provide some signage? And as Jim referenced, we started to get more and more of these requests. So that's what, again, as I understand it, precipitated this conversation at infrastructure and public safety. We don't have that guiding document about what services we recover our costs for. I'll give the example of the fair. We do have Jamie's staff do a great deal. The Parks, Rec, and Forestry staff do a great deal to support the operations of the fair, both before, during, and after that event. However, they have a contract for service that dictates what their reimbursement is because it's held at a county facility. If the steam show not held at a county facility, we don't have that contract. There's not a direct mechanism through that contract for the recovery of those funds. There's an opportunity for some enhanced clarity on what our practices are. And I know the sheriff's office has had people go out to the steam show, and I don't know that they recover costs. Yeah, they just They know there's a large event, something might happen, they would have to respond anyway, so they send staff.
So then, in a
Go ahead,
kind of
Supervisor Dickens.
a follow-up with that then is, so who is or / would be coming to the county? Is it the municipality or is it the event, the person running the event or the group running the event?
Yeah, in everything I've done, it's who's ever running the event I've been dealing with who's ever running the event, not the municipality.
Yeah, I think that in practice, that has been the case. I think the opportunity we have in terms of setting expectation is one where we could, what is the expectation when an event comes to Jim and asks him to set out, him and his team to set out barrels on a roadway? How do we want that? What should be our guiding policy from the board? And apart from the direction we have about recovering costs, similarly to the sheriff's office, what should be the guiding policy there?
Go ahead, Supervisor Dickens.
Then I just had one more, and then does anyone feel there's an expectation that these kinds of costs should be incorporated into the taxes that people pay? Do you ever sense that people say, well, we're contributing money, why do we have to pay anything additional? And is, because I don't know what the costs are. I don't know if we're talking about $10,000. I don't know if we're talking about $50,000. I would assume it depends on the event. But I just want to throw that out there because I wonder if some people have that expectation. Well, what else are you doing today on a Saturday?
It's been my experience, some people have that expectation while others completely understand that. For example, you brought up Taste and Glow. If the expectation was to have the appropriate level of law enforcement at that event provided by the sheriff's office, the cost of that, my estimate, if you have 10,000 people, there are ratios of how many law enforcement you're supposed to have. That's an expensive undertaking, very expensive undertaking. My sense is people would expect that you'd have to pay for that, just like a private event. If you're going to have a large private event with several thousand people, to have security, which is in the assembly permit. Again, if it was a permitted activity, you can write within that assembly ordinance the requirement to have a safety and security plan. But I think your question's a great one. I think my sense is, again, that's what the difference was with the city. The city of Wausau's expectation compared to what the direction we got from the board. City of Wausau, again, my understanding is Department of Public Works, Police Department does a lot more about just having law enforcement officers present at events within the city as part of their daily business. And I don't know, the policing task force chairperson probably has a better understanding of that than I do, but that's my understanding.
McEwen?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Supervisor Harninger.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of add into the discussion for a moment here. We're talking about recouping costs for holding events and what that comes to for if we have to do signage or DOT has to do things or if the sheriff's office has to do things. And I've just kind of seen it in the past where if there are costs, I agree a bit with what Supervisor Dickinson is saying that, there is a perception by the public that some of these costs are kind of included in what their taxes are and what they do to live here, I guess. But I don't 100% agree with that. I think that there are costs obviously associated to this that go above and beyond what your normal taxpayer is paying, and they shouldn't be burdened on that sense. And especially if these events are ones that are they're profitable and they're doing things. I think that might be something that we would have to take into account if you're looking at a nonprofit or something like a charity that's holding an event. That would be one thing, but you're talking about Taste and Glow, where you're talking tens of thousands of people and a major event that's very profitable. Yes, it's good for Marathon County. Yes, it's good for our local economy. But there are services we're providing, absolutely. So I think that has to be part of that discussion. And I know with some of the other counties, they've come up with basically a rate, so to speak, if they have to bring in off-duty officers, like Administrator Leonard was saying, there's a ratio formula there. If you have 10, 20,000 people, you have to have, or you should have, so many fire or emergency response folks there, between first responders or heat strokes, things of that nature, like a first aid tent. And I think that should absolutely be part of the cost of them doing business there for providing those services, which we should. And if I'm understanding the conversation that we're having right now, is that correct?
Correct. Any other comments? Supervisor
No, I
Robinson?
guess I just wanted to weigh in on that.
No, thank you for the comments. Do you have anything else? And like I said, the discussion right now is wide open as far as what, if we should form a small task force with public safety and infrastructure and the parks, or what direction, as Supervisor Robinson said, what are we looking to accomplish with this? So.
Well, and one more thing I'd just like to add, Chair McEwen, I'm sorry. The tourism committee that we have, I know that when we hold these things in the smaller municipalities, if they're holding these events and they're requesting these things, and then they're a small enough organization that they really can't afford to put these things in, there are typically situations where they can appeal to the tourism committee and say, hey, we'd like to have this, that, and the other. And sometimes, that money is set aside to help these type of events happen. So that might be a consideration to have somebody from tourism weigh in on, if there are funds there that could assist some of these organizations in having their events and take care of the costs. And I mean, we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul at that point. The money's coming from one, committee to the other committee within the county, but at least we'd have, I guess, some costs associated to it. I'm not sure if that, I guess I've seen things like that happen before, so it's just a thought.
Thank you. And as far as the tourism committees, a lot of your municipalities belong to the tourism committee. Rothschild's has their own, but they do take in significant room taxes with these events if they're overnight. And like I said, there is a benefit, for tourism. So I agree. Go ahead, Administrator Leonard.
Just to clarify, I think that's a good point, that municipalities frequently have those dollars, those room tax dollars, in a specific mechanism through their operating rules and their budget to allocate those funds. My recollection is that the Extension, Education, Economic Development Committee had funds allocated to it that on occasion were used to support local events. The one that's coming to my recollection is the Ginseng Festival quite a number of years ago. But those funds, the county board reallocated those funds that were historically allocated to that committee for that purpose. At least that was one of the purposes for the funds. Those were reallocated to the University of Wisconsin Extension to expand in a position. So there is no committee within the county, other than, of course, the HR Finance and Property Committee that has a contingency fund. There's no committee that has funds allocated to it for purposes of supporting these events as a normal course within the budget.
Thank you. So any other suggestions, or and I guess you can understand why this has been sitting out there for about 3 years. But with that being said, I just think that we need to give staff some direction as far as how they should move forward with this or not move forward with it. But it would help, the department heads that are involved in this as far as having some type of policy from the county board. Supervisor Robinson?
I'm wondering if we shouldn't include ERC as a committee, just given the fact that the parks flows through them. If you're looking for representatives, but I think it would be incumbent upon trying to get sort of a scope, so you don't have creep or so at the end you understand what they're doing. So if we could, define what they are. I think what we're really looking at is not the assembly policy, but the policy of assemblies that impact county services at this time. Is that correct?
I think that would be important for staff to have some direction in terms of what we should do. I agree with you that, I understood the direction in the past was to start moving toward a cost recovery policy. That makes logical sense for me. It will help me with my budget, which I appreciate. I do think, based on the ordinance that exists and the memo that I received from Corp Counsel, I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this ordinance, at least based on our initial review, has provisions that mirror very closely an ordinance from another county that was determined to be unconstitutional. So we should amend the ordinance sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Corporation Counsel, do you have anything to add to that, or?
No, that's my advice as well.
Thank you. So I guess, that would be now could you incorporate that statute or that ordinance that we have in with a new policy as far as the direction, take care of both of those? We know this one has to be rescinded. It's unconstitutional. We can't do that. But while we're doing that, come up with some type of, new policy that gives direction to the department heads. But I agree with Supervisor Robinson about what direction. So I think maybe we should, decide what direction if we're going to do that. And I agree with ERC is a good idea to include them. You'd have, 3 supervisors, one from public safety, one from this committee, and one from ERC. That would incorporate the parks. So I guess looking for suggestions is how we want to move forward with this. Supervisor Dickinson.
I would support the idea that there be a representative to work from each of those committees to work with the administration and the departments to kind of move forward and update that as soon as possible. I mean, I think that makes sense. Rather than it being, all of the committees working on it, and it's just going to slow things down.
If I may,
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think that's a good suggestion. In terms of time frame, given that right now, as Jim already alluded to, departments are, and certainly I am kind of getting into the heart of budget preparation. My sense is this can wait until November, certainly for us to kind of really start to bring that group together and provide some direction. In my mind, building on what Supervisor Dickinson and Supervisor Robinson have referenced, kind of seems like we're going to have one group working on 2 parallel pieces. One is going to be providing that clear direction, which I think is this will be the easier of the 2 projects, the clear direction to departments, primarily highway, parks, and sheriff's office, about cost recovery for event support. And then the second parallel path is really the review and updating of the ordinance in light of the memo that Mike has prepared. Does that sound? I'm trying to reflect back what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I believe that would be good direction. It's under education, so we're not going to be able to vote on it. But I do believe after the budget, so maybe in our December meeting, which is always the first Thursday, we could, have some information to fill in those what-ifs and who's going to be on those committees. Does that sound okay with the committee?
And if there is a member of this committee that is interested in working on that, please just let me know, and I can have the same conversation with the chair of both ERC and the chair of Public Safety, and see if we can get one representative from each of the committees.
So if you want to think about it, let me know, or let Administrator Leonard know about possibly serving on that, that task force. Unless somebody wants to do it now, but. Gary, yeah, Gary. So, all right, like I said, we'll do that if that's okay with the committee. All right, thank you, good discussion. Moving on to 7C, 3.8, County Comprehensive Plan, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I asked this to be placed on the agenda. I know Supervisor Zhang, who's not here, he was going to try to make it, had asked particularly twice at full county board meetings if there was any discussion from any of the standing committees on 3.8. And I do recall at our first board meeting with this new board, the decision was made when the Diversity Affairs Committee was eliminated, that if such discussions about diversity and inclusion and equity, if there was any discussions like that, that it would be best if it was handled by the entire board and each standing committee, if they chose to have a discussion on this. So the 3.8 is not in our strategic plan, but it's in our comp plan. So I guess what Supervisor Zhang did send an email with some suggestions. I believe there was 5 of them under our rules, our duties and responsibilities, which there's 20 duties and responsibilities under infrastructure. But the ones that he had highlighted, and I know I talked to Supervisor Dickinson, and he did ask that email be sent to all the infrastructure members as far as what Supervisor Zhang's suggestions were. And I'm just opening it up for discussion. But the most of the suggestions are 5 is under our responsibilities, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are all technology, which falls under infrastructure. And then 17 would fall underneath the airport as far as signage and those type of things. But I know I had talked to Administrator Leonard. He had some thoughts on what's been occurring so far with technology. So if Administrator Leonard, if you want to address those issues with technology.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Chair McEwen just asked that I provide a brief update of kind of some of the things that, in line with the email from Supervisor Zhang, that staff are doing based on our annual work plans. So I'll begin, and I'll go through this rather quickly under numbers 5 and 6, relating to the broad-based discussion of policies and to encourage public involvement and communication and increase transparency. One of the biggest things we've done over the last little over a year was really the development and onboarding of our communication and engagement strategist. That person was added to administration in June of 2021, and I know I'm probably biased here, but she has been a godsend to the organization in terms of ability to really craft more effective communications and come up with strategies to engage the public. We have she is spearheading the website project that I'll talk about in just a little bit. We've enhanced our internal newsletters as well as our external newsletter, where we've developed some social media policies to provide guidance to departments, and we've Corporation Counsel's Office and the Communication and Engagement Strategists have conducted social media training for our various departments that utilize social media to make sure that we're speaking more effectively with the community. So I think we've made a lot of headway in that respect. With respect to the website, I concur with Supervisor Zhang's assessment that our website was in need of some work, and we have been working on getting that, getting a vendor to assist us in that. We're moving from hosting that and developing that internally, which had been our practice with City County Information Technology. We are doing that now. We're going to outsource that to a vendor for the platform itself. I can report that we began work on our new county website on July 21st. We've selected the vendor, signed the contract. We've had a couple of meetings with them. Staff are in fact meeting weekly with the vendor to bring that new website forward. Specifically as it relates to ADA compliance and usability, that is one of the areas that we specifically called out in our request for proposal. And the vendor that we're using is Granicus. They are a very widely known vendor, particularly in the local government space. So I think we're going to have some opportunities there relative to translation. We're working to get some clarity on what those translations within the website are going to be and if there are any limitations. As far as the specific reference of using screen readers, that's something we'll look into, but largely, as I understand it right now, that's based on the device that you have. But our implementation team is going to continue to seek to utilize alternative tags, which are if you have something that is not otherwise easily read with a screen reader, that you make sure you have the language within that website to allow the screen reader to function. As it relates to the broadcast of board meetings and committee meetings on public access and YouTube, certainly the previous board, I believe, took this action, but just to inform everyone, we do now and have been recording and broadcasting all standing committee meetings on YouTube as well as the public access website. That is promoted through our monthly external newsletter, the Wisconsin Central Times. Staff, our communications and engagement strategist, takes the lead on sending that out, and in each issue we do reference the availability of those meetings, to view those meetings through those media. And in fact, if you do watch the media coverage, frequently they do note that we have the YouTube channel to watch those meetings. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can see the number of views. My sense is that we have a lot of people actually tuning in to utilizing the YouTube channel to check up on meetings. But that's certainly an independent judgment you guys can make for yourself. With respect to a marketing and outreach plan, to date, we haven't done that. If the direction of the board is to undertake some specific marketing and outreach plan, I'd ask that you develop that and please put that into the annual work plan and help me prioritize, find where that lies in that prioritization. I will say, however, with our new website, we will have what Granicus refers to as Gov Delivery. That's a notification service, so the public can in fact select various areas, subject areas within the website through that Gov Delivery portal to get updates automatically when we do provide those updates through our website. So I think that'll be a service that should address some of those concerns. With regard to translation, the county does have a contract. Periodically, we release a request for proposal for translation and interpretation services. We do have that vendor under contract. SWITS is the name of that vendor. They were selected through that RFP process. We do train staff on how to engage SWITS. SWITS is used very frequently. Best example is probably within the court system. If an individual is going through court and is more comfortable with a non-English language, we will make arrangements for that translation. But we use it also in a lot of other departments, social services, health department, very frequently. I don't know if CPZ makes use of it as well. All departments are aware of that service. So those are just some of the updates that I wanted to provide based on the request from Chair McEwen.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson?
In addition, the broadband task force is starting to look at the issue of digital equity and inclusion. The Wisconsin Public Service Commission is leading efforts on a statewide basis and how we can expand access. And if you look at some of the things that are happening in the county, Bug Tussle is in the process of rolling out Bug Tussle University, where they'll provide educational programming to people on how to use and access computers. On a statewide basis, United Ways, AARP, and other groups are looking at how do you expand access. There are significant funding opportunities going ahead based upon the state plan to expand outreach, and that falls within the purview of this committee, but it gets at that issue of equity and inclusion. Access is not only is the fiber or the wireless tower within reach, but it's also, can I afford the equipment necessary to run it, and can I understand the programming? So I think those are some of the things that we'll be looking at a committee level, not necessarily expanding the county's role, but collaborating with other partners to try to increase access, understanding, and use that hopefully will fulfill part of this goal.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do want to mention a couple things, and if Supervisor Zhang was here, I would have kind of reached out, but he can watch this, I assume, or we can talk to him in person, or I can talk to him in person. Google has a translate function. You can go to Chrome, you can translate any page, or you can download a document, and you can translate it, and Hmong is one of those languages. So you can actually go to our county website, and you can translate that into the Hmong language, or Spanish, or Hungarian, whatever that might be. I didn't know that before, but thanks to his email, I looked into that, so that is available. YouTube has a translate function for subtitles. I'm not sure what all the languages are, but you can actually turn on your closed captioning and you get subtitles, and you can get those in the language that you choose. So we do have those available. You mentioned device-specific, like screen readers and such. I have a iPhone 8, or excuse me, an iPhone SE 2022 that I just upgraded from my 6. There's a tool on here called a VoiceOver. And what you can do is actually set that, and by touching the screen, it will then speak to you where you are on your phone. So those things are things that are available, so in that case for the blind or those with difficulty seeing. So I would alert Supervisor Zhang and others that these things do exist, and oftentimes it just takes finding the right person in the community who already knows how to do that to make that happen. So I did want to reach out on that. The one, as far as there was an item there later about signage, I would assume that there's some laws regarding signage, like in the airport and such. You mentioned Braille or things like that. I don't know. But I did just want to throw those things out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on those? Like I said, I agree that, some of the stuff that even with just Supervisor Dickinson just mentioned, I didn't know a lot of these options were available, and I don't know if that can be something that can be, made a little bit clearer on our website. But, like I said, I did want to have a discussion on the suggestions. There's 20 duties and responsibilities, and I was not able to connect any of those other duties and responsibilities with 3.8. But if I'm wrong, I'd like to hear that. But like I said, these were suggestions. I think we had a good discussion on it. And like I said, I guess with the technology that's happening with our website and the changes, I think we're moving forward in the right direction for this. Supervisor Dickinson?
Just one last thing that I didn't point out. I know we talk about Washington County a lot. They actually have a translate button right there on their website that you can just click on that button. You can pick your language and everything's done, so you don't have to go through the Google settings.
Thank you. Is there any other suggestions? Supervisor Hardinger, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a few. Thank you, Chair McEwen. And it is unfortunate that Supervisor Zong, especially requesting this, be a discussion item that couldn't make it today. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get my laptop crashed on me last week, and I'm doing what I can to recover it. So I haven't been able to actually get to a lot of my emails. But I guess as far as the signage at the airport, as far as requesting additional services being done through our county, I understand there's obviously a large need for translation services when you're talking about Administrator Leonard pointed out with the court system, social services, things of that nature. But I guess my first question would be, what feedback have we gotten from the public requesting these things, or is it primarily coming through Supervisor Zhang?
Thank you, and I'm not aware of where these suggestions came up except from Supervisor Zhang. I don't have any knowledge of anyone else. But I guess my question is, with the airport, if I'm sure there's some federal requirements on signage, like Supervisor Dickinson said, but would that be the airport board, or would that fall underneath our jurisdiction? I'm not sure. I don't know if Administrator Leonard knows or Corp Counsel Preener knows if there would be some signage changes. Whose responsibility would that be?
Likely the airport director would have the ability to make those changes. The airport board would directly govern that, but certainly the airport director would be obligated to make sure signage is in compliance with any requirements.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I neglect to mention signage before. I do think there are some opportunities. We've learned a lot going through the North Central Healthcare campus renovation about the importance of wayfinding. That was one of the big criticisms of that building before we started the renovation project. And for those of you that have been to the building pre-renovation, it is easy to get lost there. There are a lot of hallways, and they don't always make sense as to where you're going. So to the extent that Supervisor Zhang is addressing the need to enhance wayfinding for individuals coming into our buildings, I do think there's an opportunity if you hang out here long enough. It happened to me this morning. Somebody's standing at the intersection of the hallway out here, kind of looking around. It's like, hey, can I stop? How can I help you? She was supposed to be at City Hall for a court issue as opposed to here. But nevertheless, I think we do have some opportunities to get more consistent signage across our buildings. And that's something that I've talked with our communications person about, because there's really two sides. There's the legal requirement of what signage needs to be there. But then there's the practical piece of, the whole point of signage is to help people get where they need to go. And a lot of that is really more of a marketing and communication piece. So I can bring you back something in the future, in a future budget. It's not going to be this year that we're going to be able to address it based on capacity, but I suspect a wayfinding project for our county buildings as we move forward will be a future focus.
Thank you. Supervisor Dickinson.
Just one thing to kind of end it about signage and stuff, and I'm going to look over at Commissioner Griesbach. So yesterday I'm driving on the highway, and we're behind a dump truck, I believe, and it said stay back 100 feet. And we were kind of talking to each other, my son and I, that, boy, wouldn't it be interesting that as you approach 100 feet, that sign kind of flicks a light or gives you some indication that you're at 100 feet, you need to back up. So kind of a funny thing, ties into what we're talking about, but just an idea that popped in the head. Thanks.
Thank you. So are there any other discussion on the 3.8 and the duties and responsibilities of Infrastructure Committee? Nothing? Okay. All right, well, thank you, and good discussion. Appreciate it. Moving on to 7D, the 2022 North Central Region Commissioners Committee meeting, October 28th at Country Air in Stratford. And Commissioner Griesbach?
Yes, I just threw that in a quick to inform you that we are once again hosting the 18-county region meeting. They just put me in charge, so I host it in Stratford. But this year, we are having, the topics are our own Molly Aztec from our HR is going to be talking about recruitment and retention. So hopefully she has some great ideas along with Roland Hawk from Wood County. We're going to also talk about roadside vegetation. We are going to be talking about legislative issues with the BIL. And we were fortunate enough to get the Secretary of Transportation is coming to this. He normally doesn't come to smaller events like this. So it's a great opportunity. He's going to open it up for questions. So that's October 28th. Let me know if you're interested so we can get you registered. There's lunch afterwards. Again, you don't get to talk to the Secretary of Transportation in a group this size very often. So I encourage as many people to come as possible. Again, for him to come, it was kind of a big deal for me to wrangle him in. So I'd like to have a good crowd there. So, John, you ready?
I should be. I didn't look at my calendar, but I should be available. That'd be great. Thank you.
It's a daytime meeting. Registration is at 8:30 and a very good lunch at noon.
All right, thank you.
If we get enough, I'll post it as an agenda.
If we have more than 4.
Yep. So
Thank you.
right now I have John, Craig, and Chris.
All right. Anything else on that? Thank you. Moving on to 7E, Quarterly Highway Commission Safety Meeting Report, and Kevin Lang is in, this information's in your packet too, so thank you.
Let's give you a quick briefing. I attended the Highway Safety Commission meeting on August 3rd, so it's a group of law enforcement, DOT, county officials that get together and, I don't think we were going to go. Did you want to go through all of it, Chair?
No, it was in their packet. If you have any specific questions for him, we can address those then.
Yeah, we had included, the DOT has a construction report that they give at that is included in the packet. And then the Bureau of Traffic Safety gives a update on kind of some granular data of crashes. I guess the biggest thing that they had on theirs is from 2020 to 2021, crash data across the board significantly increased, and that was a Marathon County statistic, a Wisconsin statistic, a nationwide. So they're looking at that data and looking at more campaigns and trying to find different ways to solve that. It's kind of like our safety plan, trying to do what we can that we know is countermeasures to combat that. On the county highway side, we had a few topics on there. Highway R and N intersection, we had law enforcement and local officials comment on some kind of erratic left turn movements out there, and we had addressed that and discussed that with the committee to just see if get some of their stakeholders' input on it. R and double N, we had a similar turning issue there that we brought because we had the kind of the people in the room that are used to dealing with the law enforcement side and the traffic side. J and N was an intersection that had come up, and we were getting some feedback from the group and just kind of asked them to take a look at some of the data on that. That intersection is a two-way stop that at the end of the summer here, we did some traffic counts on and be evaluating there's some warrants that the DOT has together to evaluate intersections for need for a four-way stop. So we'll be looking at that data this fall and analyzing that and working with Tony Kemnitz is a DOT, is a traffic operations engineer. He's a resource that we kind of use whenever we can to help evaluate those things. And the last thing we had was Highway W. We had one of our college interns who was in looking at some of the crash data on that one, and we'll be talking with Tony to see if that might be a project that would be eligible for highway safety improvement funds based on the number of crashes that are on that road. It's kind of a curvy road going up parallel alternate route to 51. So, is there questions on any of the information in your packet?
Thank you. Are there Any questions? Supervisor Dickinson?
So one of the things that we've done over the past year was the ATV, UTV on the county roads. And so I had requested the community maps information, talking with Commissioner Griesbach a couple months back. And, that data, unfortunately, at this time isn't a checkbox that you can actually pick on that site. Hopefully someday they'll get to that, so that can be easily seen. They do have the report, the off-vehicle highway report that DOT does. And I just wanted to mention that because, as of August 31st, there's 12 fatalities, none in Marathon County. Last year there were 47 on the entire year, and I think there were 37 the prior year. So I just find it interesting that number is significantly lower through the summer right now, and I didn't know if that had come up at all in that discussion about the ATVs.
That statistic did not, but the community maps, Randy from the Bureau of Traffic Safety, he went through and illustrated that community maps program. It's hosted out of UW-Madison, their Traffic Information Center. They are working, one of the big changes they're working on with ATVs is integrating that crash data into that site. There is a layer now that has it. It's not searchable, similar to how like traffic crashes, you can put in there a date, a location, and look for injury crashes or property crashes. They don't have that level of information from the ATV, UTV, but they now at least can map all of the on-road ATV, UTV. There's a layer in there, so you can at least see it. It's not searchable, and they're working on integrating that a little bit better so that the DNR reporting of ATV, UTV crashes can be more consistent with the regular traffic crashes.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion on the report? All right, thank you very much. There was a lot to look at with all the little dots with all the crashes. It makes it a little bit easier to follow, but there's a lot of good information in there, so thank you. All right, no other discussion or questions for Kevin? All right, thank you, Kevin. We'll move on to 7F, broadband expansion efforts. Supervisor Robinson?
Lance, I sent you an email. Could you open up that attachment? But since we met last, I believe we didn't talk about LTD and the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, but as you recall, the Federal Communication Commission had a reverse auction program where they identified unserved and underserved areas, and they put it out for bids, and you basically bid in reverse fashion. So if it costs $1 to provide service in those areas, you agreed to provide it for something less than $1, and LTD was selected for a significant portion of Marathon County. They were a firm out of Minnesota, and they were awarded on a nationwide basis $1.3 billion worth of contracts, and they've been experiencing some problems relative to getting the appropriate approvals at states in California, Oklahoma, Kansas, and others, and there have been concerns expressed about LTD's ability to provide the service. They had committed to provide gigabyte service to residents at an affordable rate. The FCC received a long-form application from them and didn't act on it, and there were growing concerns about their ability to deliver, and finally the FCC recently removed the approval or preliminary approval for LTD broadband for all of their projects, as well as Starlink. As a result, those parts of the county that were potentially going to be served by LTD will not have that opportunity. In many cases, there are other providers that have moved into those areas. Bug Tussle with their wireless and their fiber system is one. Other companies have expanded in those areas, but it's a setback from the perspective we won't be able to look at it. But it's good because we now have clarity we were concerned, and LTD had approached the Broadband Task Force about trying to partner with us on a grant to the Public Service Commission for the same service area last year, and we declined to do that. But by virtue of having that designation as a potential RDOF funding source, we were not able to apply for other federal funding programs. Now with that D certification of LTD, we'll be able to look at other funding sources on a federal basis. But I apologize, but I thought it would be worthwhile to see the map. It basically is that area in orange. Would be the area that LTD would have served. So there, we'll have to look at our strategies in providing service. The green is charter, and they are moving ahead with their installs on gigabyte service. But that area of orange we'll go out and look at, and as Broadband Task Force, try to work with other internet service providers in those areas.
Thank you. Any questions? I do have one. John, the orange areas are, is there a population estimate for those, or is that not available?
There were, and it's not, I don't have ready access. I was trying to grab that information and don't. I can try to look at it. One of the things that we were learning is they try, so there was a process in December of 2020 where people submitted their bids. There was $20 billion available nationwide. About $9+ billion was awarded. Again, LTD was 1.3. Charter was 1.2 billion nationwide. But they put it in a long form application. They had to be certified by a entity, Public Service Commission in Wisconsin, as being eligible. And then the FCC would look at it. I think they found a lot of problems with the system, and as they were going through, they found out many of the areas that were identified as unserved, underserved were actually served. So they withdrew the approval for those census tracts. And I think FCC is reviewing their processes and procedures and pre-qualifications of firms so that it doesn't happen again. But, Bug Tussle will serve parts of that. Other providers will serve parts of that. So we'll need to go back in and find out where the true gaps exist. And we are continuing to work on the speed test, and the speed tests now become very important in these areas so that we know what the speeds are, where there's that underserved and unserved areas. The FCC is in the process of upgrading their process by which they determine unserved, underserved. It used to be if somebody in a census tract had service, the entire census tract was considered served. That's not true. You could be across the street from somebody and not have service. And they're going away from census tracts to locations, so hopefully that'll be better, and that will be applicable for future grant opportunities. There will be another round of the RDOF reverse auction. I'm not sure when that will be. There's no discussion of a pending date. They're still in the process of reviewing and approving the 2020 version.
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have one more. Is there the change as far as the speed of the internet, as far as up and down? I know it was like 25.3 or something before, but
well, the speeds have been changing. And when we had the CAF, which Frontier received funding for to serve about 8,800 residents in the county, the desired speeds were 10.1. They were basically using DSL. It's morphed into 25.3, and now you're seeing 100. There's the hope is symmetric, but they're going with 120, 100 down and 20 up. RDOF, in many cases, it was gigabyte service. So you're seeing the broadband utilization increases about 30% a year. More and more devices are utilizing broadband. For instance, your new 4K the TVs can take up to 25 megabytes, and if you get a couple of those operating in a home, you can use your bandwidth pretty quickly. And if you're streaming, video conferencing, and doing other things, the need for an expanded system is there. And most of what we're doing in the fiber provides us that opportunity to expand and grow into the future. The limitations are on some of the wireless services going forward, although there have been enhancements in that area as well. But I think if you're really looking forward, the capability to go to gigabyte services is desirable, but 100 would be adequate for most residential places. If you're a business, you might want to look at higher speeds.
Thank you. Any other questions, discussion for John? All right, well, thank you very much for the update. Moving on to 8, announcements, future meeting and agenda items. If you have any, go ahead.
Just a reminder, didn't make here, but you're going to have the special meeting for the culvert bridge aid before your next county board meeting, which I believe is September 22nd. So half hour before 6:30, you'll have a special meeting for the 2022 county bridge aid.
Thank you. Supervisor Robinson?
One other item that I forgot. At 11 o'clock today, we're meeting with Steve Schneider from Bug Tussle to talk about their expansion plans and others. And I imagine one of the topics will be that LTD RDOF area. We're trying to resolve our role in going forward with their PSC grant serving Cronin-Water and the Leather Camp area. And then also finalizing some of the details on the action we took last year.
Thank you. If you have any other suggestions for infrastructure for October 6th is our next meeting, 9 o'clock here. Is there any other announcements? All right, moving down to number 9. Supervisor Dickinson, Supervisor Robinson. With a second, any discussion? Signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much. What, 6:30 before our next